The expert gathered all of the necessary tools and persisted in his quest to determine the cause of the stuck door. Meanwhile, a growing number of irate customers gathered outside the bank, their frustration growing as they waited impatiently for answers about where their money was and how it would be used. They were filled with anxiety as they waited. The experts tried to solve the mystery of the mechanism, but they were completely stumped. Even with the help of extra personnel sent by the manufacturer, they couldn't understand a thing. Everything seemed so complicated and confusing, and there was no explanation, unless the door was. They decided to break through the side of the vault door by midday in order to discover out what stuck it. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they still hadn't figured out how the door could be closed from the inside, since it was the only route in and out of the vault. It was completely absurd. Finally, I have a little hole opened up, allowing them to peer inside the vault. The workmen claimed the unthinkable. The bank had been robbed. The bank director immediately contacted the police. Within minutes, the bank was flooded with cops, including every important officer in the department, who were prepared to investigate. A massive bank heist that occurred when the hole was widened and the police flooded in. The criminals got off with the money and other valuables from 4,000 safe boxes. And a quotation in large font on the wall read, "Without firearms, without the issue at hand, is how the robbers gained access to and escaped from the vault," which was readily apparent to the detective stationed there. A hole in the floor revealed a tunnel leading to the city's subterranean sewage system, and the tools that the robbers had used to break into the vault were discovered nearby. There found evidence of a large operation with 27 gas cylinders used to feed blowtorches, ventilation apparatus to provide fresh air into the tunnel, and over half a mile of electrical wire. Clearly, this was a well-planned undertaking. The largest bank robbery in world history was dubbed the Heist of the Century, and most international media utilized that title as their headline. The operation began months in advance, which is worth the award they have received. By the end, the burglars had stolen money, jewelry, and precious metals worth approximately $10 million. Not only was this the largest bank heist in French history, but it was also the largest investigation of its kind. Top investigators from across the country flocked to the scene, and they interviewed thousands of bank employees and customers in an effort to piece together the clues that would lead to the thieves' capture. After a lengthy investigation, the detectives discovered evidence that implicated a notorious gang known as the Sewer Rats, who frequently utilized the sewer system in their criminal activities as accomplices in the heist. The evidence included not only boxes in the vault, but also interviews with bank employees and residents. They were on the hunt for the mastermind behind the operation and were nearly certain that the suspects belonged to the Sewer Rats. However, they believed that none of the suspects had the capability to plan it yet, so they decided to keep them under constant surveillance. A clue about the robbers appeared on the first days in October. 2 men under surveillance attempted to sell gold ingots at a local bank. An employee of the bank tracked the ingots and noticed that they matched those stolen from the bank. The staff alerted the police, who promptly arrested the 2 men. Authorities had solid proof that those members of the gang would grow closer to one another if coerced into speaking or confessing to the identity of the operation's mastermind. The French police were warned that relatives could be falsely accused of crimes of which they were unaware, and that they could detain anyone they wanted. One of the 2 men identified a photographer named Albert, who claimed to have planned the operation. The police promptly contacted Albert and informed him of everything that had transpired, including the use of illegal methods to force a confession. Police were devastated because the man did not fit the profile. He sounded innocent and lived a simple life as a photographer. Many people claimed he was a charming romantic who was above all, and the man was so shocked that he told them he didn't know anything about it. Devoted to his wife in particular, and wishing to escape the hustle and bustle of city life, he was apprehended by the police after a seemingly bizarre plot to rob a bank. However, detectives resumed their investigation, and he continued to assert his innocence. The investigation had dragged on for hours, and the police had exhausted all legal and illegal means of coercing a confession from the photographer. Despite this, Albert remained composed during the questioning. Meanwhile, the police had raided the cottage he and his wife shared, and they had discovered illicit weapons and explosives. The police were able to gain an advantage during the interrogation because they were able to use illegal means to obtain the confession they wanted. They threatened Albert, who they believed loved his wife very much, by accusing her of gun possession and sending her to prison for many years, refused to allow her to be arrested. In a desperate attempt to save his wife, Albert had no choice but to tell the police the truth. He admitted to being the operation's mastermind and provided a detailed account of his plans. He explained that the idea had occurred to him 2 years earlier when he overheard a neighbor discussing its potential. With someone who worked at the after learning from the bank that the vault lacked an alarm system, Albert rented a safe box and began photographing every nook and cranny of the vault. The bank had previously granted safe box holders access to the vault without guards so they could feel more comfortable placing their valuables inside. The vault held thousands of secure boxes, so he had to devise a strategy to remain undetected for an extended period of time in order to break all or most of the locks. After much trial and error, he settled on using the vault's subterranean sewer system as his primary entry point. Pleasant City has a massive subterranean sewer system, but it wasn't located beneath any of the buildings. So Albert had the bright idea of excavating a tunnel from the nearest point to reach beneath the bank building. Little did he know that this would be an incredibly challenging feat to accomplish. After weeks of searching, he finally decided to go beneath the sewer system in search of a line that would lead him. Going straight to the bank and figuring out where to begin digging was an incredibly challenging task. The sewer system smelled so musty that he smoked a Cuban cigar to mask the odor. After coming to the realization that this mission was hopeless, he went to the city hall disguised as a contractor to obtain a map of the city. It became much easier for him once he discovered the sewer system. After locating the closest branch to the bank, he identified the correct spot to begin digging. From there, he needed to dig a 30-foot tunnel. Not a huge distance, but the biggest obstacle was that the digging was taking place under one of the busiest avenues in the area, which was, there will be a traffic jam, and it will be heard from the street above. Albert had a plan, but he lacked the resources and the men to make it happen. So, he went to Marseille to meet with some Gaines leaders, including members of the Sewer Rats gang. They were highly enthusiastic about the plan and agreed to help him in exchange for a large portion of the spoils. The operation couldn't have started without the necessary manpower and equipment. Albert took every precaution to ensure that the digging wouldn't fail, and he assigned a team of guys to the digging zone with radios to alert others in the event that the police showed up unexpectedly. Classic tools in a cramped, poorly ventilated area so as not to be overheard by anybody else. The diggers had a tough time working in such circumstances. Eventually, one of the men passed out, and Albert had no choice but to split them up into teams. The group would put in 10 minutes of effort, followed by 10 minutes of relaxation. There was a doctor on call in case of crises, but in order to keep working, they hauled in ventilation tubes and half a mile of electrical wire, which they then used to power ventilators and lights by tapping into a neighboring garage. As a result, the working conditions were improved. Albert, who thought that the plan's success hinged on the comfort of the workers, made every effort to ensure that they were at ease. After 9 weeks, on the first days of July, they finally reached the vault's wall. Everyone was happy, but Albert knew that there was still a lot of hard work ahead of them. They still had to overcome even though it wasn't hard. Breaking through the 12-inch reinforced concrete wall required jackhammers and drills. Albert was worried that the noise from the digging zone would be audible, but his fears were unfounded. He couldn't hear a thing, and they broke halfway through. On that fateful night, they decided to continue their foray through the vault wall. The following night, D-Day arrived, Saturday, July 17th, because it was the first day of the weekend. The bank would be closed, and they would have plenty of time to finish what they had begun. They succeeded in entering the tunnel, and the rats finally gained access to the vault at 2 a.m. on Sunday, after spending much longer than expected, drilling through the remaining 6 inches of reinforced concrete. The first order of business was to weld the steel door to its frame, giving Albert and his crew enough time to. They proceeded to break into the vault one by one, and to their amazement, they discovered jewels, money, and everything else they had ever wanted. To celebrate their victory, they dined like kings on the gold-plated dishes they had discovered in one of the safes. During the night, armed couriers arrived to make a deposit. It's a routine operation. A van loaded with money was thrown through a small hole that led directly to the vault. As if that weren't bad enough, sewer rats kept breaking the other safes. Monday morning at 5 a.m., Albert stated that it was time to leave. Less than 4 hours later, the bank will open. But before he left, Albert took a paint spray and wrote the famous quote. They spent nearly 27 hours inside the vault, and they only opened 400 out of 4,000 boxes. But that was more than enough for them. The detectives were enraged by the individuals who were applauding and laughing at the crime scene as they went about their business, chatting amongst themselves and using the phrase, without weapons, without violence, without hate. In the end, Albert was taken into custody by the police, along with the rest of the sewer rat gang. He recounted everything we had told the detectives before, and stated his intention to cooperate in exchange for protecting his wife from being involved. While in custody, Albert and his lawyer, used to Albert, spent half an hour in the judge's office every Thursday, and everyone was expecting that he would receive a reduced sentence in the last meeting before his sentencing because he was so cooperative, and the judge wanted to assess his readiness to cooperate. This situation lasted for several weeks. Following his customary routine, Albert visited the judge's office. He began by discussing the heist and presented the judge with 3 sheets of paper containing drawings of my sewer system. He proceeded to explain the events, his plans for the operation, and the location where they had begun digging. However, the judge appeared perplexed, so Albert offered to help by taking notes. Taking advantage of the judge's bewilderment, Albert collectedly stood behind the judge's chair and started to explain to him in greater detail how they had started from this location, followed this path, and finally arrived at this point. The judge listened intently, staring at the map, but suddenly he shifted his body to face Albert. Albert leaped through the window behind the judge's desk, leaving the judge and lawyer stunned and confused. The judge's office was on the first floor, so he was able to easily jump onto the roof of a parked car beneath the window. His friend was waiting for him on following Albert's disappearance. The police were unable to locate the stolen loop or him. He had withheld any information that could have led them to it. Nevertheless, it was revealed that he had sent $600 in cash to the owner of the car whose roof he had crashed onto. Throughout his life, Albert sent investigators provocative photos and messages through various media outlets. Regrettably, his beloved wife chose not to divulge his life of escape. She stayed in Nice, where she kept working as a nurse. Albert was the mastermind behind the biggest crime of the century. Here we reach the conclusion of our journey. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and activate the bell button to get future videos.